Yeah, I sent out a thank you note to folks.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. That was a great picture, by the way. It turned out good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Councilor Brad, how you
Hi,
doing?
good afternoon.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I guess it was too late. I suggested to staff to Kenan that it not be sent to the paper just in case it impacted on future events and COVID restrictions.
oh. Well, everybody was masked up, I think, and so it's just one of those things. And Heather and I stood close together in it, but I didn't stand close to other people. So, yeah, was it 340? Was that our final guesstimate of numbers?
340. Well, based on the portions of scalloped potatoes. Welcome back, Councillor Ludwig.
Hey, look at it.
Based on portions of scalloped potatoes, it was 342 dinners.
Yeah, that's excellent. Good. Yeah.
But then we served a couple after that with just ham and mixed vegetables.
That's right. Yeah, sandwich sandwiches. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's Councilor Lumley. Yeah, good. Well, it looks like we're all here. I'm just checking the time. 3 o'clock. I've got. I'm going to go to the corporate officer. Corporate officer, are we ready to proceed?
Yes, you're ready to proceed.
Okay, thank you. And welcome everybody to the Committee of the Whole meeting of April the 6th, 2021. And welcome back, Councillor Ladwig. We've missed you. This meeting is being held in the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Call the meeting to order at 3 o'clock. Before we adopt the agenda, I'd like to reorder it. I'd like to move 3.4 to 3.3, and 3.3 becomes 3.4. There was more of a logical transition there in terms of what we're doing today. And that being said, I'd ask a resolution from council to receive all reports on the agenda. Yeah, Councillor Crowell, thank you. Councillor Dean Drad, thank you. All in favor of receipt of reports? Thank you. And we'll go to the first item on the agenda. And with Councillor Ladwig back, we would like to reschedule the development permit application review process workshop that we had scheduled with council for last week. And with our CAO away and with Councillor Ladwig away, we thought we should just reschedule that. So I hope you've had an opportunity to look at your calendars. And are there any dates, preferably an off council week? So that being said, that would be either next week or the fourth week of the month. And I don't know whether next week is too quick for staff to organize something. Next week is the Tuesday. Got a poverty forum at 7 o'clock and a couple board meetings, but that's all.
And out of town on Tuesday.
Sorry?
I'm in Langley on Tuesday.
Okay. How about the 20th? How does that work for you?
Mayor Beamish, this
Yes.
is
Don't we have council on the 20th?
Yeah, the 20th is Committee of the Whole and Council.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry. Oh, yes, there we are. Yes, we are short. Okay, the 27th, that would be, sorry. The 27th, or we could go on Monday if a Monday works, like the 19th. 19th, probably, if that would be a good date for everybody.
It doesn't work for me.
Councilor Ladwig, sorry?
That doesn't work for me. The 27th would work,
Okay.
but the 12th and 19th, I'm booked.
Okay, I've got a meeting from starting at 3:30 on the 27th, but that's all I've got booked for that day. So you want an afternoon session or you want an evening session on the 27th? It's a workshop, so it's not open to the public, so that it will be just ourselves and staff.
And the time commitment, like 2 hours, is that what you're thinking?
I would say 2 hours, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, my meeting is just my liaison meeting with the Public Market Board, which it could change for me, so there you go.
I'm flexible on the 27th.
Okay, should we say 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock on the Tuesday, the 27th? Okay, sounding good. Staff, how's that working for you? Director of Planning is going to be important for you? Okay.
That works for us.
Okay, yeah, I apologize for having pushed it so far ahead, but that's what dates are dates these days. So, okay, let's do that. Do you have a resolution to that effect? Councillor Kroll, moved by and seconded by Councillor Lumley, that will hold the development permit application review process workshop on Tuesday, April 27, starting at 3 p.m. Great, everybody get in their calendars. I'm going to put it in mine right now. And so that okay. And set the time. And done. Okay, thank you. We'll move on next to the first report, and this is from the Director of Infrastructure and Acting CAO, and that's the report on the tree preservation bylaw review process. And Director of Infrastructure, I invite you to come forward.
I was having problems unmuting, which is a standard Zoom protocol, I think. Thank you. So the report in front of you is the tree preservation bylaw amendment. As you know, this was brought to council, I believe it was in June for first reading. And we then went out to the public and for comment, and eventually it was adopted, I believe it was in October. And at that time, both staff and council's intention was that we would revisit this in a 6-month time period. And here we are, 6 months have passed by. And one thing staff was fully anticipating that we would begin applying the bylaw and run into all sorts of one-offs or concerns from residents or what have you. And so and this is a new type of bylaw for the town. And then council also wanted to make sure that the public was given the opportunity for further response to the bylaw. And council has heard some feedback, I believe, as have we. So far, we've had 28 applications, and out of those applications, 24 permits were issued. 94 trees have been removed. However, 80 of those were hazardous trees, and the majority of those were actually on public lands. There's been some money collected for cash in lieu and some fines issued for removals contrary to the bylaw. The concerns that we've heard raised by residents, developers, and staff, and this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but we've tried to summarize it as best we can. There's some confusion as to when a permit is needed, and whether it was needed for pruning, and kind of a little bit of a side discussion on whether trees could be retopped or the merits of topping them in the first place. There have also been complaints about the bylaw is hard to read due to the length and language, and we've also had concerns that the bylaw was rushed through, and despite there being at least 2 months, if not 3, between when the time that the bylaw was first introduced and the ultimate adoption, this 6-month trial period was, I guess, in a way intended to garner more public input, and so the plan is to have another public input session where council can hear directly from the public, and staff can provide some of their input as well. There's, as with a lot of our challenges or challenging or contentious projects, we often get a concern about lack of communication, and council's taken that to heart and authorized somebody to a position for communication officer, and there's she does a great job in keeping our Facebook up to date, the website, and providing input about other avenues for communication. And in this case, not only it was on Facebook and the webpage, but direct mail out was provided. There have been concerns about views, and trees, obviously, they grow up and they can change the view that you're used to seeing. And some concerns about restrictions on what people can do on their land. Staff have got some suggestions to address some of those concerns, and there is a simple flow chart on the town's website, and we've also discussed when anybody applies or inquires about a tree bylaw or a tree permit, that they will automatically be emailed a summary of what you can and can't do under the terms of the bylaw. As I mentioned, staff are recommending another meeting be held with community, and despite that recommendation, I know that that is council's intent, regardless of staff's recommendation. And at the end of this report introduction, that I would be asking council to set a date and time for that meeting, to keep this moving along and get the input that we were asking for. The communication, we do take many different ways of communicating, and in this case, it was a two-sided postcard that went to every address. And despite that, we often hear that we did not receive that, and sometimes I think mail out sometimes get fired straight into the trash along with flyers or what have you, things that aren't directly addressed to you or to the resident. And I think probably I would, we could perhaps review that more with the communications officer, just in general, how our communication coordinator, just how we can get messages out more, or get the public involved more in looking to the website and Facebook for information on the town. There have definitely been concerns about views and what, in general, what residents are permitted to do on their own land. And there's discussion that needs to happen around this. And at least from a staff end, we're not looking at all or nothing. We're interested in hearing what the specific concerns are about the bylaw in general, and then how we can make recommendations as far as how the language could be changed or revised to find an acceptable middle ground. And it's guaranteed that we are not going to be making everybody happy, and that's just a fact of human nature. You can try as you might, you can never make everybody happy, but at least we could find that sweet spot with this to to still retain the reason behind the bylaw and the concerns that addresses. There are some specific bylaw amendments that we would recommend, regardless of what comes from the public, as well as including some possible changes to the tree replacement amendments. One of the ones that has one of the tree removals in town that's garnered some interest is the trees removed in the on the grounds of Gibsons Elementary, and I find it always difficult to see trees come down, and sometimes standing on the curbside, you don't necessarily see what a professional arborist would see as far as dangerous limbs or dangerous trees in general. And those trees were deemed to be hazardous or of high hazard, and have been taken down so far, and there will be more planned to be taken down in the later in the summer. And the school district is working closely with the town on that, with our natural asset technician, and they will be going through the processes for removal of those future trees. The issue with risk is that you can have that identical tree and it could be next to a trail, and it would have less of a hazard rating than it would where it is currently on the school grounds. And if that tree, when it fell, if it was not going to impact any area where humans will normally be walking, it would have a lower hazard still. But because the potential target are school children, the hazard rating is considered high because of the possible tragedy that could occur if a branch or a tree came down. Two tree fallers and two arborists have looked at those trees and concurred that unfortunately they were deemed high hazard, and so, as I say, those 8 did come down. There's I think one of the things that we really need to work on is the view protection, and staff are already we're churning our wheels as to or our gears in our brains as to how we can put forward some options for this. But regardless, we need to hear from the public first in order to get a full picture of that. The other aspect of I think being a tree bylaw and having it apply to private property is being difficult for some people to be able to accept or understand, and I think because it is a tree bylaw and they're not they haven't been as common in the past, although they are far more common now. It's something, in a way, something new. And but fact is that we have development permit areas, for example, in the town, which do dictate what and how things are supposed to be done on certain properties. We have building permits, of course, and zoning requirements, and that already provide some guidance as to and direction as to how properties should or shouldn't be used. And personally, I feel that the bylaw is necessary to address some of our climate change concerns. And with the state of how we're seeing changes in the climate, some changes need to happen. And of course, what that means is that, we will experience change, and that change sometimes is different from what we're used to. It's not as comfortable, but regardless, some things do have to happen. And probably the last comment at this point in regards to the trees and the benefits that they provide, regardless of where they're located, is the town's burning bylaw, and that was introduced many years ago, and that was to do with air quality. And that's air quality that you can smell and you can see often. And so the town council at that time determined that that a bylaw would go in place to ban outdoor burning, which again is something else that the town restricts as what can and can't be done on a property. And in this instance, these trees, one of the benefits that they perform is CO2 sequestering, or I'm using the wrong word here, carbon sequestering, sorry, and CO2 absorption. And that is a benefit in the air that you can't see as easily. And although the intent of, or the thing that brought this tree bylaw up to the front was seeing some of the larger lots being cleared for development, and the fact that we had no bylaw to regulate that. And but as we went through this, we determined that it was applicable to the whole of the town, and we've now got 6 months under our belt, and we can now hear back from people, and hopefully we will get a reasonable number out to any sort of public meeting that we can put together. So I think at that point, I will leave it. There's probably lots of questions, and I'm more than willing to answer them. And hand it back to you, Mayor Beamish.
Thank you, Director Newman. I'll go to questions of council. Council Lumley, I saw you had your hand up at one point there, and go to questions before we go to the resolution.
Yeah, I had a few questions. I think I agree with, well, I have these like petitions in front of me that somebody gave me. There's over 300 signatures on them. So clearly there's some concern from the community that maybe they didn't get input. And I mean, I don't know how to quantify how you have a public engagement on Zoom. I mean, we just did for the budget, but I mean, 17 people, like, I don't know how that can be improved. A part of me thinks that we should just go back to our original discussion, or the original plan was like there would be a committee formed, and maybe these people's concerns can be taken through a committee of people in the community that can help form the bylaw, and then it would take a little bit more pressure off of staff, I guess, and council if you actually have bylaws that have direct community input. But that was one thing I thought, only because my concern is just having a public engagement. It's just really, really tough, especially during COVID and during and on Zoom. The other thing I was thinking of is when I'm the trees at the school, maybe it'd be important, or maybe it'd be the best thing to do, because like those trees did look very healthy. Obviously the pictures, I think like Mr. Janik forwarded to the mayor and council. The trees looked like quite healthy, like there wasn't any rot. And maybe if we just put the arborist report online, and like obviously like the town has to live by the same bylaws as the people live by, hopefully, and maybe that would just quell any concerns from the community where they see they're not allowed to cut a tree down in their yard, but the town and the school district are clearing 20 trees at once. So that was one thing I thought, maybe having the arborist report online. And then I had another question was regarding I know somebody in the community they had to pay like over $8,000 in fines for cutting down 3 trees. And to my understanding, they thought they were doing, I know, and I think that we understand through this, it is such a big and large document and complicated to read sometimes for people. They actually thought they were kind of doing the right thing at the time. I don't know if you have anything you could tell us about that, David.
Yep.
I'll be interject here. That is subject to appeal, Councillor Lumley, and I really don't think we should be discussing that particular specific matter in a public hearing, public meeting.
I can speak to it in general terms, not that specific one, but I can speak in general terms about those issues. But Mayor Beamish, would you like me to respond to some of those points?
Don't get into the specifics of
no problem.
The appeal process.
Yeah. So the petition, yes, there is definitely public interest out there, and that reflects some of that. I'm not sure if there's petitions going around or not that support the bylaw. I haven't seen either one, or I haven't seen any petitions myself. The challenge for input is, yeah, definitely how do you get meaningful input, and how do you get input from people who support as well as are concerned about it. Often we do find that the people who are happy with things are less likely to speak up, and then with Zoom and COVID, how do we get a reasonable representation of people out? I'll leave that with you guys. I do want to mention though that we did have that budget meeting, and despite it being on Zoom, that was the most people we'd ever had come up to a budget meeting in all the years that I've been here. So in 15 years, that was far beyond the number that had ever shown up before. So this may be another one of those times where we might find that we get a reasonable amount of response back. And should staff come back again with the response subsequent to the a Zoom meeting, for instance, council could determine to do another meeting or what have you. We're not, I'm not hearing that this is the end of the road. If council feels like more input is required, then by all means. One thing I would encourage, that if I heard you mention committee, and the one thing I would encourage is that the bylaw, at least as it sits now, stays in place until such time as any revisions are made, because you'll see an increase in tree cutting during that period of time if we do not have a bylaw in place. And just a concern. There was one comment made about the school district there, about the town and the school district not following the same rules. The school district has, I don't see that the school district has any relation to the town at all. As far as we're concerned, we're looking to a property owner and requiring them to go through the same processes that we would commercial business or private residence, multifamily, doesn't matter. And if any fines are imposed, there is a way and a means for people who are concerned about those fines to dispute or appeal them. And there is a process to do that in the town bylaws already. And so there are means for people to question that and appeal without coming back to council, actually.
Councillor Crowell?
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. Thank you for the report, Director Newman. I sort of agree with Councillor Lumley. Originally, this bylaw was supposed to be drafted by committee, and it fell on staff to do, and they were somewhat in a bit of a crunch to get it done because there was concerns about what was happening in the community. So, I'm certainly in full agreement. Keep the intention of the bylaw and the bylaw in place until a committee can review it. Obviously, there's a lot of complaints about COVID and, I didn't get the card, I didn't get the email, I didn't see it on the website, I missed it on Facebook. So if we have to have 2 or 3 committee meetings to get it sorted, I'm all for it. It's obviously a lot of people are unhappy. Tonight in our correspondence reading files, there are a lot of people who have written in, as opposed to just signing a petition, totally in support of the bylaw. So yet again, it's another sort of hot topic in the community. So I think we need to take the time to do it right. Reading through the proposed edits that staff have suggested, I think most of them make sense, but again, there are things that the committee can review. Because it's a bylaw, obviously there are legal implications with it that have to be met under the, just the acts of government. So I think there's an opportunity to, to take it back to committee, as you say, keep the bylaw in place and, treat, sort of proceed status quo, but keep sort of a finger on the pulse that it is a working document once again.
Councillor Diendrath? You're muted, Councillor Diendrath.
Council has been aware of the needs of a tree bylaw. This has been a priority for us, and seeing what we saw, this rampant development, especially with development proposals, we were concerned, and we knew that there would be glitches. And I think perhaps what this bylaw should also, the communication piece should also do, it's to communicate to the public the importance of a tree, the crucial role they play, and the urban forests play. And I know there's stuff on the website that you can read, but perhaps the public doesn't understand, right? In terms of stormwater management, climate change, biodiversity conservation, and other values such as, recreational, aesthetics, and psychological. So, and I think council did anticipate that we were going to have some issues, and that's why we have this review. So I think this report, it's good to provide recommendations to improve, but what I feel that this report, it's not discussing, it's a very important piece of the puzzle, because we know we need to learn from our mistakes, from the things that, not our necessarily council, but mistakes that happen in a community, whether it was by a resident or by anyone or by our own tree by law, excuse me. I think there's a silence in relationship what happening in Gospel Rock. we know that there has been a clear cut there. I'm sorry, something on my throat. And and council has not been informed what happens. We received a report about a damage of 3 trees that have.
Councilor, if I can interject, you're going off on a different tangent right now. We're talking about the tree bylaw and how to address it with the public as opposed to the specifics of Gospel Rock or any other matter. So
Mayor Beamish, how can we learn about things if we don't have a report on the biggest clear cut that we had in town? So now we are going back to the public to ask more for public input. And we had council after 3 months. After 3 months, we still don't have a clear information of what happens in Gospel Rock. And these were trees protected by the tree bylaw. The Douglas fir.
Councilor, I'm going to ask you to move on because you're just rehashing an issue that is still before council and it's going to be discussed later. And you're making it the issue of the hour as opposed to the tree bylaw in general. And that's really what we want to discuss is how we move forward and amend the tree bylaw to make it workable for the community and to protect trees that are required to be protected. So that's what we're trying to do here. And we're talking about establishing a committee or another process. I would remind council though that when we went through this process, we actually held a public hearing on the tree bylaw, which is what we did as we put it in place. And there was quite a bit of discussion about the newspaper in addition to the mail out that went out there to inform people. And it is a matter of refining it. We said that we would work with it for 6 months, and that's what we're doing. And we're bringing it back to the table. If it wants to go to a committee route of establishing a committee to deal with it, then that's certainly an option. It may not be the quickest option, but it certainly is an option to do. Councillor Ladwig?
Yeah, I just want to say I support this concept of a committee as well. I think the more I think about it, getting experts, certainly staff have their own expertise, but getting people from the community that have an expert in tree preservation and an understanding of how this bylaw might impact their business, if they're in development or what have you, I think that would be a good idea. I think we should hear from the community in a committee type format. So I support that.
Thank you. Councillor, there's something wrong with your sound today. You've got quite a dull roar comes through when you speak.
Oh, I do?
You do, yes.
I can fix that. Well.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Inrad, you want to make a motion?
I would like to actually to make a motion.
Yeah.
But I would like to make a motion that before we proceed with the public meeting for additional consultation, that the town hires an independent consultant to assess the tree cutting which took place.
Councillor Inrad, that's not a motion I'm going to entertain. That's a motion you're trying. It's on the camera agenda tonight. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
I have the right to make
this discussion before, and we are going to deal with it later tonight, not at this time. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ladwig, do you want to make your motion about a committee? Or Councillor Lumley, I'm sorry, Councillor Lumley, you raised the issue.
Yeah, I think obviously Councillor Cole said after I spoke that was the original intention. I think with the number of people that are being engaged, whether they're for or against it, and I know some of the issues that are against it, I think will just get filtered out through the committee, right? And I think that would be the best thing to go. So yeah, I'd make that motion that the tree bylaw, it could stay in place, obviously, because we don't want to. I don't think you want to go backwards, but I think by engaging a committee with peers in the community would be going forward. So that's what
that would be a select committee. And so and we'd ask council or staff to come over the terms of reference for a select committee, and we'd advertise for members and go through that process. So
yeah.
Okay. So and seconder of that, Councillor Kroll, second. Further discussion on that recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Opposed? You opposed, Councilor Andrade?
No,
Okay, in favor. Thank you. Okay.
I-
Thank you, Mr. Newman, for your report.
okay.
Okay, we're now going on to what we had numbered as, this is the renumbering. So we're going down to the UNDRIP report, and that's currently on your agenda, Council, as page 23 of your agenda package. And this is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Mr. Newman again.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. I'm going to go through this fairly slowly and methodically because it's taken me a while to fully understand, and I probably think I fully understand and I don't, but some of the legislation. And so this reports to dealing with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples with the acronym UNDRIP. So in 2007, the United Nations General Assembly adopted this UNDRIP, which is an international human rights instrument endorsed by 148 nations worldwide, and included several articles covering all aspects of human rights of Indigenous peoples, including culture, language, health, education, identity, religion, and community. And this was, as I say, an international assembly, as opposed to our own Canadian. And this was to do with the all rights of Indigenous peoples, whereas in 2015, Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission established a kind of a more of a focus on the experience and impacts of the residential school system on Canada's Indigenous peoples. And the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, listed UNDRIP, the international declaration, as the framework for reconciliation of all levels across all sectors of Canadian society. So in that TRC, there were 94 calls to action covering all sorts of areas, including child welfare, education, health, justice, language, culture. And the TRCs, while UNDRIP is global, essentially, the TRCs are specific to Canada. And as I say, acknowledge and address the enduring impact of residential schools on survivors and their families. And if there's anybody who has not read into this and have heard it on the, in the background or see it coming up on the news, I really encourage you to familiarize yourself with what has occurred in Canada to the Indigenous peoples of this area. It's horrifying, for want of a better word, and very, very eye-opening that this has gone on in Canada and up until relatively recently. The TRC report does also provide guidance to all levels of government to undertake measures to implement UNDRIP and especially as it pertains to the residential schools. Now, on a provincial level, the BC government passed a bill on the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People Act in November of 2019 to implement UNDRIP on a provincial level. And they were the first province in Canada to put UNDRIP into action through legislation and with an intent to bring legislation in line with UNDRIP, which is a tall order with a government. And then it filters down to this level where local governments, the following actions are immediately applicable, which is call to action number 43, where the TRC calls upon federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to fully adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation. And there's a second call to action, number 57, where they're calling on the same group, the TRC is calling on the same group to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties, Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, Aboriginal Crown relations. And this will require skill-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. And this is being integrated into our society and our way of operating and relating to Indigenous peoples for so many years. And it's become entwined, I think, with a lot of what we do. And a lot of people, me included, don't fully understand the First Nations culture. And it is different from the people who colonize this area. And so there's, I think in a way a lot of us don't know what we don't know in this regards. Now, Gibson's regular council has recognized this before, and in February of 2020, there was a resolution that the town confirmed its support for the legal recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples to determine uses of their land on their traditional territories, and there's a little bit more there, but that was largely in response to a specific item. And there was also, okay, I'll leave that there. So there in March of this year, council did ask staff to take the next step and that plans be brought forward to support meaningful engagement, employment opportunities, and outcomes that serve First Nations and Indigenous partners in project implementation and learning. That implementing the UNDRIP as well as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action be considered, and further a report, which this is, to be prepared to provide additional context. And there's a list of how UNDRIP could involve, or how the town could be involved in UNDRIP is recognition of the importance of the culture of the Squamish Nation, through the art that already exists in the community, with a vision to encourage and promote that more. And anyone who's driven up School Road has no doubt spotted the supportive housing structure that is being completed, and it's got some very cool, large Squamish art on the side of the building. There's also some above the art gallery. Thank you, Mayor. And there's an interest in having more of that throughout the town. There's in here, there's lists of supporting Indigenous peoples, industries, communities, and government, and working together by encouraging discussion of shared interests and partnerships. And there's more in there, which I trust that you've read, and that UNDRIP is the minimum standard for the survival, dignity, well-being, and rights of the Indigenous peoples. It's funny, I'm scanning through this, and they all are important. So I'm kind of loath to brush over any of it. There's also communication on a staff level. So as well as council indicating an interest in determining how to move forward with more consultation with First Nations and more of a relationship with our Squamish Nation, and an examination of how to address their rights. The staff have also been doing the same on a staff level and reaching out to our counterparts in the Squamish Nation, and regardless in a way of what council's doing, that we're taking a responsibility ourselves, because it shouldn't be, although council can certainly lead the way and can certainly act in that regard, it's all of our responsibilities. It's not just our local government or provincial government that should be dictating what we are doing. We need to be doing this on an individual basis. And one of the key things, actually, one of the things that started me thinking about this was when we had received a grant from, I can't even remember what grant it was, but and it was, have you done any consultation with the First Nations community? And if the answer was no, then you were to provide them a letter and give them 3 weeks for a response. And I looked at that and thought, I know they don't move that way. I know that they don't. That hasn't been my experience, and I've never had any response to those. And so I gave them 3 months, and I followed up with a phone call, and ultimately, no, we did not get a response. But that's largely, I believe anyway, because I hadn't developed a relationship with them. And on top of that, I'm sure we weren't the first ones to have to tick a box to say that we had done consultation. Council has also reached out and had a meeting with some representatives from Squamish Nation in regards to place naming in the town, and that's still on the table, and we hope to see further discussions in that regard. And at this point, staff have got their recommendations on the first page of this report, that council adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, as recommended in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, pledging to use it as a framework for Indigenous reconciliation. And furthermore, that council directs staff to bring back a policy reflecting council's goals and objectives for the implementation of UNDRIP. And that would be, I could see it potentially being a living document in a way, but would set out what the specific measures that council will be doing, and why I call it a living, or seeing this as possibly a living document, is that the more we learn, I think the more that we will realize needs to be done or amended or adjusted to reflect what we learn in our relationships with the Squamish Nation. And they're a very cool culture, and as are the Sechelt Nation. And as with many cultures, we can learn a lot from them. And I just see this as being a really important step for the town. And I'll pass it over to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman, for your report and for the recommendations. And I'll turn to council now for comment. And Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Director Newman. Something that we've already done that was the declaration of the National Healing Forest, which incorporates the White Tower Park and the Sharman lands. And the National Healing Forest Project is part of the reconciliation and part of the healing process that needs to happen. I know Councillor Ladwig has been very keen to have an area sort of adjacent to the pool for gatherings. Something maybe we should be considering long term is with the development of the stormwater pond by the pool, that actually a learning center be incorporated in conjunction with that, that would work as an amenity to the pool, but also a learning center. My understanding is that the pool is going to be planted with native species, some of them which were used by First Nations for healing. And I think, you know, with the redevelopment of that area, it creates an opportunity to enhance the healing forest, but also create an opportunity for learning. While I was sitting on the regional district, we were having regular meetings with the Squamish Nation, just to get some of the background of, as you say, things we just don't know that went on that are embarrassing. But I think, you know, we have an opportunity. My understanding was that when we declared the National Healing Forest, the Squamish Nation were fairly impressed that we took the initiative. We are the last time I checked, we're still the only community in BC to make that move. So it is an opportunity for even other areas on the coast to make that gesture. But I would certainly move the recommendations as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Kroll. Somebody want to second the recommendations or talk further? Councillor Diandrat, is that seconded? Councillor Diandrat, second the recommendations. On the table now for discussion, further discussions. Anybody else have anything further to add? Yeah, I think that we're fortunate here in that we have a lot of resources on the coast. I've been exchanging messages with Nancy Denham, who's involved in Sawaya training, I believe it's called, yeah, and looking at opportunities with that as part of the training process. I've also had conversations back and forth with Councillor Chris Lewis of the Squamish Nation, and that's primarily been on street naming and place naming, and looking at opportunities in Gibsons for that. And so that will come further in our next report. So, further discussions, Council?
I don't know.
Councilor Diandrat?
Thank you. Well, I just want to, I think I'm very proud. This is a great initiative. I know we have made the first move, but putting this in practice,
Sure.
I think is really important. And
You have to go to your mom's.
and as the Director of Infrastructure mentioned, it is probably a living document, but I'm glad to have started. And I took the time to read everything because it was quite interesting. I was quite impressed how the Truth and Reconciliation document, it's very complete. It addressed basically every single area of the impact, right, our civilization had on theirs. So I think it's an important moment. I think it's with climate change, with the crisis that we're facing in the world, that's the way to go. And one thing that they do have as traditionally, like in their culture, is the notion of consensus. And I think we have been more used to a voting system, which is the majority wins. And we have attempted, even BC had the round table initiative many years ago, and that was a initiative really to try to reach consensus. And I think we try, but I think this is one of the areas that we have a lot to learn from them. But one thing, even when I did the last course, the course that you just mentioned with them, the 4 days throughout the month, they take the time. And I think this is very interesting. And as we do with the tree bylaw now, I think was a great, because the tree committee was the first initiative, and then we rushed to do this, but it's very important. And the goal, it's not a voting system or the majority wins, but it's really to consider everybody's input and how can we take the input, even inputs that sounds not, maybe inputs that different people don't agree, but we can look at that and put into and spend time to find the common ground. And once we find, everybody wins and everybody would adopt whether a bylaw. And I think this is something that I also look forward to having this in our processes and through every bylaw and everything. So that's my hope as well with this back and forth. So I'm really pleased.
Councillor Ludwig?
I'd just like to suggest that we develop this policy as a bilateral policy between us and the Squamish Nation, and possibly a trilateral one if the Seychelles wants to as well, but that we develop it as a bilateral policy that gets developed in concert with them and signed off with them. That's something that the federal government is starting to do now on a regular basis, where we develop it as a true partnership, not just us taking feedback and then writing it on our own. If we really want to embark on true reconciliation, they should be developing it with us. Now, that will take time because they're very busy people and whatnot, but I think we should at least make an attempt to do that.
We do have a protocol agreement with the Squamish Nation. It's probably time we sat down and reviewed that with them as well. And part of the process would be to update that. Maybe have another community forum with the Squamish Nation. We haven't had one of those since we've been on council, and I don't know when the last one was. Councilor Newman, do you know, or Director Newman?
No, I'm not sure. Sorry.
Yeah. Other comments? Sorry, Mr. Newman, yeah, go ahead. Mr. Newman, go ahead.
Thank you. I do want to actually, I mentioned that I'm kind of new to learning about UNDRIP and TRC and so on. And Michelle Lewis, our natural asset technician, is First Nations, and she has been instrumental in, she wrote this report. And she's been instrumental in reaching out to Squamish herself, and she's quite amazing at making contacts out of seemingly nothing, and I've learned, most of what I just spoke to you about from Michelle, and it's been kind of a neat journey. But as I say, I just want to give credit where credit's due.
Thank you. Councillor Broligan.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. This is another opportunity, and here I go with one of my, the broken record beachcombers. But Tracy Lindbergh, who wrote the book Birdie, was telling us years after the fact the impact beachcombers had on First Nations, and the fact that this little TV series that was produced here had a huge impact on First Nations. There were still children in residential schools who were having all their culture and their identity stripped away from them, but ironically, they were allowed to watch beachcombers, and it afforded them the opportunity to identify with their elders, to become aware of their traditions and customs that were, on one hand, were being stripped away from them. So it was part of the reasoning behind the expansion of the museum to highlight, first of all, the First Nations people who performed in the show, but also to acknowledge some of the issues that were addressed in scripts as, in the early 70s, dealing with some of the cultural heritage of the beachcombers. So I think there is a unique opportunity. A number of the Squamish Nation people have expressed interest in working with us on the development of a tribute to the First Nations in Beachcomber. So again, it's another piece that we can put into this work going forward.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments, the motions that, two motions that council adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as recommended in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action report, pledging to use it as a framework for Indigenous reconciliations. And further, the council directs staff to bring back a policy reflecting council's goals and objectives for the implementation of UNDRIP. That's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. That's approved. And thank you, David, and pass our thanks on to Michelle Lewis as well for the report information. Thank you. So that takes us then back in our paper to the report on the proposed naming of streets, parks, and public facility policy update. And this is once again go to the Director of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. And Councillor Ladwig, I did get your note or your comment about engaging the First Nations. And I know Michelle's attending this meeting is in the audience as well. So we heard that. Thank you. So the street naming policy, I had it open on my computer and it's now closed, so I'm going to have to do this from memory. But the policy has been amended a few times. The consistent theme through the policy was to recognize pioneers that arrived here with George Gibsons and so on. And there has been a varying list of people who settled in this area attached to the policy over the years. And it's I find it interesting to, sometimes just see names that come up in the news and recognize a street name. Or see a gravestone up in one of the cemeteries, one of the oldest cemeteries, and recognize again all sorts of street or place names from the settlers of this area. And it's largely, the policy has largely been silent on anything to do with the people who were here for thousands of years before any colonists landed on the shore. And while we see that, there is, and as I mentioned, council's already met with Squamish and open discussions about this. But in the meantime, we're going to be having some new roads being constructed, and from staff level, and I believe also Mayor Beamish indicated an interest in seeing this policy back as well, that we would amend the policy to even address the report I previously gave, and that was to have less emphasis on the people who landed on these shores less than 100 years ago, and start looking further back than that to whose traditional territory this is. And staff are suggesting that the current list in the schedule of names be retired. There's, as I mentioned, many names in the town that already bear the names of people, community members over the past 100 years, and some of them quite recent people, recent names as well, and replace that with a schedule of local native flora and fauna, or at least flora anyway, and which is a a little less charged, shall we say, than naming them after the people who settled here with George Gibson and since then. And two reasons for that, apart from, as I say, less, being perhaps less charged, is that the First Nations have always been very much in touch with the land and in harmony with the trees and plants in this area, using for healing or for ceremony, and so that's why we've got that list there. We could do some more research on some of those names as well, as to how potentially First Nations use those plants. And then there's also another list there of, I found them interesting names, largely to do with their aquifer. And then some of our translated names of Squamish words that are also in there, and that these schedules would form part of the street naming policy until such time as relationships have been developed with the Squamish, and we can have a meaningful discussion as to how they would see street naming or place naming or what have you, how that would be meaningful, in what way that would be meaningful to them. So that kind of takes care of this proposed edits to the policy. The other item is that, ironically, we just have one street left in, or one new street that is being constructed in Upper Gibsons, and that development already has a focus, I believe, on more recent residents and contributors to Gibsons, and potentially the last road that could fall under the old policy. And the developer has requested that the single road be named after Celia Fisher. And although I knew Celia by sight, I didn't have an opportunity to work with her on any projects. However, I do know that she was fairly well known in the community, and Mayor Beamish probably and Councillor Kroll could speak to that further. But there is a list of how she's been involved in the past. And as I say, the developer of Parkland has requested that their last road be named after Celia Fisher. And I put forward Fisher Crescent, because there's going to be ultimately two ends to that road, so it forms a crescent. As I say, going from memory, I hope I got everything in the report there. If I didn't, please quiz me, and I'll hand it back to you for questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Newman, again. One of the things that we have done, as I mentioned to council, I met last year, I guess, firstly probably around this time, with Chris Lewis in West Vancouver. And Chris Lewis is one of the councillors on the Squamish Nation. And we talked about naming, place naming, and talked about how we're going to amend our policy that recognizes settlers. And subsequently had further conversation with them, simply because we couldn't meet. They had the idea coming over here. So I followed up with him again in January, and his comments back to me was, as you know, the nation is very supportive of naming and recognition of our place names and language. I've added some of our directors from the nation to this to get it on the radar. We would love to learn more on how we can assist you in this endeavor. And I think the next step is find a mutual time that we can meet over Zoom. So I think that's the next logical step. But we wanted to actually amend the policy first to have an open policy rather than a policy that we put on the table that identifies settlers as a priority for street naming, which is what our currently does. So on amending of this policy, then we would go forward the next step and look at place names. One thing that we need to consider is when we do use Squamish names, and especially if they're in the traditional form of Squamish language, how we put perhaps an anglicized name beside that, whether it's in dash or brackets, or how we would do that, so that not everybody has the ability to easily read and pronounce in the Squamish tongue. So if we do use Squamish name, that's something we would want to talk about with them as to how they see that. Also, so there's consistency. My conversation with Chris Lewis was that, as you drive the Sea to Sky Highway and go up towards Squamish and beyond, you know whose territory you're in. As you get off the ferry at Langdale, you don't know where you are. And people often think you're in seashell territory as soon as you come over here. Yet the continuation of Squamish territory is very important. I was looking this weekend at the plaque we have on the waterfront that identifies the landing of George Gibson and the discovery of this new land site, which actually was known as Checkwell. This is actually was a village area. And we need to start recognizing those things more formally than anecdotally, so that that's part of the process. We would hope that this would initiate the list that's been provided with this draft policy is simply that, a list. I envision that list being far more expanded after consultation with the Squamish Nation in looking at some of the place names. What did they call Gospel Rock, for example, as it promenades onto the ocean? What was the name for that? What was the name of some of the other features we have in our community? So that would be a good opportunity for us to start looking in that direction. So, councillors, any comments? Councillor Kroll.
Thank you, Mayor Beamish. With reference to your Langdale comment, it did come up at the regional district in one of our meetings with the Squamish Nation, or with the Seashell Nation, that because they've been going through the business with naming. But I did raise it with the RD that because the ferry terminal is in Area F, that it's something that they might. And I guess it would be the regional district that would have to work with the Squamish Nation to come up with appropriate signage. The other thing is, because the waterways were the highways of the First Nations, and I've mentioned it before, I think it's really important that where we have the opportunity to have outward facing signage, that also be done. Because, you looked, particularly during the summer with all the tourists coming through on their boats. I don't know if anyone noticed Plumper's Cove this weekend was a sea of white hulls. It was packed with people who've come up here to, over the Easter weekend. So there is a huge opportunity to have signs that face the water, so people traveling through this area are aware of whose nation they were traveling through.
Okay, we have recommendations in front of us. First one, is there any proposed amendments right now to the draft policy that's presented? Councillor Ludwig?
I just have a question. I just want to make sure that I clearly understand what we're doing. So we put this forward, putting Indigenous names as the priority, but developers or other folks still have the right to come forward with a suggestion, like
They do. And then within the context of the policy as well, yeah.
Right. And then how does those two get weighed out?
Council is the ultimate decider in naming of streets and things and places. So,
Right. Okay.
Councillor Dindrad?
Thank you, Mayor. The way I see, because every time you change, I mean, we can do like one by one, but in this particular situation, especially Gibsons is small. I think it will be wise, like you mentioned, perhaps just take some of do some quick editing on the policy, just to take priority for the settlers, but the second settlers, make the priority for the first settlers. But I think it will be wise to have some sort of a plan, like you said, that they can look at the town and just go through this this kind of a plan and say, okay, what are the areas that were significant? I know Gospel Rock was one of them because it was a lookout point, and other areas are usually creeks, whatever. And I think we go from there, because I think we don't want to do like some sort of a competition, whoever comes first or whoever. But if we have, and even what is the most meaningful thing for them, then we can even prioritize and say, okay, this is the most meaningful. So that's where we should really focus our effort and things like that. And
Right.
instead of trying to dispute, oh, they have 10 and we have 8 or whatever, because that's I think it's, and then we won't have too many other street names. But I think an overall planning, I think it will be, and then they could come here and tell us the story. I would love to have someone coming here and discussing with us, or just telling us what was the whole importance for this area for them, and the museum as well. Are we involved in the museum? Because the museum has so much.
They have had contact in the museum, yeah. And yeah, that is the plan. Once we have the policy in place that we are comfortable putting on the table with them, then that policy will evolve in terms of adding additional appendices and names and things of that nature are options. So that will be an option. So, Councillor Ladwig, you had further comment?
I just want to say that I really support Councillor DeAndretti's comment there, because that's sort of what I was struggling with, was how we would weigh out if a developer comes to us and says they want to name a street as something, which is totally legitimate and great, but we've got this priority that we're supposed to sort of go by. I think if we could do a little bit of planning like Councillor DeAndretti just suggested, where these areas we know are really significant to the Squamish Nation, it's like, well, that's an obvious, okay, well, this one will take priority here, but maybe not, maybe it doesn't have to over there, you know, that kind of situation. So I really like that idea of getting more information from them and identifying the areas of importance.
Director Newman?
Yes, I agree with that. And the one of the things is that might not happen right away. You know, these relationships take time to build, and the development of the community doesn't happen at the same pace as we know, and so this could in fact be another one of those living documents that evolves as we develop more of a relationship with the First Nations. The other thing is that Gospel Rock will actually be probably the next development that will be looking for street names. And so do we, or does council, pick from the proposed schedules, or, when we're down to, we really have to name these roads, have conversations, meaningful conversations occurred with the Squamish yet to put up their names on the table. I believe I've mentioned it in one, if not both reports, that we would, staff suggestion is that we start developing a page in our website that will have a focus on First Nations. And one of the thoughts that I had in that regard is that when we begin to use for more First Nations words around, is that we have the meaning attached to them, and you could have perhaps an interactive map where you can click on a road and find out what the background is of that, and even with not just with the First Nations, but the plants or whatever, what meaning they have and so on. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunities and work that we need to do, and this is just one more step in that.
I think given the importance of the Gospel Rock area, I'd like to make some priority of that as being addressed once this policy is being adopted, of then reaching back out to the Squamish Nation and saying, we'd like specifically to talk to you about this area here.
And I believe I've mentioned a number of roads in there, and I can provide you with a better overall map if you would like, as to the roads that would require naming in Gospel Rock.
Councillor Crowell?
Something that is being done in a number of areas is, as you suggested, Director Newman, that there's a background to the meaning of the word, but also there's actually, you can click on a link and hear how it's pronounced and they usually do it in both a male and female voice, because quite often it takes on quite a different connotation depending on the gender of the voice.
Yeah. And I'd much rather go through this process than the process that's occurred in some other communities where it is being imposed upon the community and there's been significant backlash, and that presents some other cultural issues when that happens. If we go forward in a planned way and say, look, we welcome this opportunity to work with you to have your culture and your history recognized in our community, how can we do it together? And as opposed to some of the other examples that we've seen out there. So first motion, are there any amendments right now to the draft policy? Are you recognizing that it would then come forward and then we would use that as a working document for me? Councillor Ladwig?
Well, I kind of can't help but laugh at Schedule B. I don't know. I mean, as a fisheries biologist, I'm very familiar with what a thalwag is, but I don't know if I'd want to name a street.
Yeah.
I'd love to live on Talwag Street.
Anyways, I would just suggest that if we could rename this local aquifer or aquatic, whatever, and fauna features, just so people can start thinking of adding those to the list as well, because it seems to stand out as something missing.
Okay, thank you. Would somebody care to move the bylaw then? The policy? It's a policy, not a bylaw. It makes it easy. Councillor Kroll, thank you. Councillor Lumley, seconded. All in favor of the amended bylaw? A policy? You say policy again? Policy? Thank you. Okay. And then the next resolution is the street and parkland to be named Fisher Crescent. Celia Fisher, as mentioned, is a long-time resident of the area. I believe she actually lived in Elphinstone, at least when I knew her. She lived in Elphinstone, but she was very prominent on the regional board, very prominent in the community as a supporter of many activities. And I think that I would be proud to live on Fisher Crescent if I lived in the community. So, Councillor Kroll?
I'll move that.
Oh, you moved that. Sorry, seconded by Councillor Ladwig, or you seconded? Okay. All in favor of the Fisher Crescent? Thank you. That's supported. Opposed? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Okay, a lot of work for Mr. Newman. Now we sit back, Mr. Newman. We'll go to next. We'll go to inquiries and open the door to inquiries today. So we have 10-minute session for inquiries. So go to our corporate officer.
We have Judy Bonkoff joining you.
Thank you. Judith, welcome. You're still muted, Judith, on my screen. Thank you. There you are. You got it.
Okay, but no picture. Oh, I could do the video too. You can, I wish you can live without seeing me, but anyway, here I am again, Mayor and Council, and I'm just referring to your to the first item on the agenda, which was, of course, the staff report on the tree preservation bylaw. And I'm just a little bit confused here because what I don't see, like I see how many, applications and permits and et cetera. And I'm wondering, in the 24 tree cutting permits, is the Gospel Rock permit in that?
Mr. Newman?
No, it's specifically noted in the report that it's not.
So is that the exclusion then? Block 7, pardon my ignorance, is block 7 what you call, is that Gospel Rock? Oh, okay.
That is not Gospel Rock in its whole. Sorry, Mayor, I'm stepping out of line there. Go ahead. Sorry.
So that's block 7. So the exclusion of block 7 And so we're talking about all these other trees, but we're really not talking about block 7. And I'm wondering, it is a report on everything. That's the biggest event that has happened in Gibsons. It's huge, big removal of trees. And I understand that it happened after this bylaw was passed. And so I'm just curious why it's not mentioned in this report, and why, I don't know why they didn't qualify under the tree preservation bylaw, that they had to get a permit and they had to get, pay all this money. We had had a lot of money in our fund for all those trees.
Now, there is a report on the regular council agenda. Judith, have you read that?
No, I haven't.
There's a report dealing specifically with that on the regular council. Perhaps if you read that, then this evening, if you have further questions about that, it would come up.
Thank you. I will look at that, because I've got another question, but I'll wait until I look at that, and then I'll be able to address it better. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have Suzanne Sanger joining you.
Thank you. Thank you. You were there. I see you. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Mayor Beamish, I'm gonna just sort of follow up on Judy Bonkoff's question, if you don't mind. So I also looked at this report, the staff report on the tree preservation bylaw, and my understanding from reading the report and what it says it was supposed to address is that it's meant to address implementation, in this first 6 months. Like, how did the town do with the bylaw? What are the pros and cons and mistakes or whatever? And obviously the elephant in the room here is the big missing piece, which is, somewhere between 1 acre and 2 that was protected under the tree preservation bylaw outside the DPA2 got cut down. And it's still unclear in the public realm whether or not, a formal application was made under the tree preservation bylaw. And if so, how did the series of events unfold that led to this tree cutting? And the reason this matters in this report, from my perspective, is, if the bylaw needs to be fixed, changed to prevent something like that from happening again, shouldn't we be hearing about, how to do that? Isn't that the purpose of this conversation with this report?
I think the report's not specific to any one incident that occurred. It doesn't address, for example, the trees at the school. It doesn't address the trees on private lands, any one incident of trees. It just addresses some of the general things that came up in context. As I mentioned, there's a report on the agenda this evening on Gospel Rock, and council may have a further conversation on it, but that's not what the purpose of this report was, to address Gospel Rock or any other specific thing. That if in the context of the committee review, they want to look at, was Gospel Rock an issue, then they could look at that perhaps. But in the general sense of this report, this was a general report. It didn't deal with any one incident of trees.
Mayor Beamish, just as a point of clarity, the report on the agenda of the council meeting tonight does not discuss the lands outside of the DPA2 on Gospel Rock. It just discusses the lands inside of DPA2 where the 3 trees were cut. These lands outside of the DPA2 were protected under this bylaw. And it's bizarre that this is a pretty big incident that happened, that we should, at least when there's a conversation going forward about, what are the recommendations for, or what's the public comment on, how to improve the bylaw, shouldn't we have more information about what led to this terrible result? So, I just really would encourage council or staff to really give us some more information about how this happened and how we can avoid it again. And also, what are the consequences in a situation like this? So,
Thank you.
Big missing piece.
Thank you.
I don't see any further hands
Okay.
for inquiry.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We're going to move on then to resolution for adjournment.
Excuse me, Mayor Beamish, there is now another hand.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Delaney?
Des Delaney, welcome, Des. You're still muted.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Okay. This has nothing to do with what's been discussed to date in this meeting. It is just a different subject. We know that the town's being closed down in the next few weeks due to COVID, as far as restaurants. Really, with what's going on, we can probably expect with a fourth wave or whatever that it isn't outside the realm of possibility we'll go into a full lockdown. Just a thought, and is that we've got Wine Garden Park there. There's money in an operating budget of a couple of $1,000s for a supposed party at the end of it. If that could be invested into some tents and put through Wine Garden Park, then perhaps it may help all the lower Gibsons restaurants to be able to do takeaway food, which may help them through this in the event that this 3-week period increases to maybe 6 or 8 weeks. So I think it's something perhaps the community could look at. I realise Councillor Lumley wouldn't be able to be part of the discussions because of his situation, but he's not the only one. There's a lot of other people in a lot of Gibsons who have invested a whole lot of money and a lot of their life into trying to make it a success. And I think with COVID funds sitting there, it would be a good gesture if, you know, something like that, you know, maybe help all these restaurants out. They've had a tough row of it. They were looking forward to some, you know, maybe some good weather, and this has hit them, and, you know, there could be more. So it's just an idea. That's all. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Des, before you go, you're suggesting chairs in the park?
Just invest in some, you know, like some tents, you know, the pop-up tents, those sorts of things, and some chairs, maybe a couple of porta potties or whatever. I mean, just the local people themselves. I mean, we know that essential travel has stopped. So the tourist side of it's also dropped off for the restaurants. But, you know, if locals want to get out to try and support, you know, these local businesses that, you know, I have no idea how they're surviving at all, really. But despite, you know, COVID funds and stuff, it would just be, as a community thing, a possibility. It may be that you have to change the zoning in the park. There may be a little bit more involved with maintenance or whatever, but just with this weather, if people have a chance to go and get some takeaway food from this restaurants and sit there, it may help their bottom line. It's just an idea.
Interesting idea. Thank you for bringing it up.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Beamish, we have one more.
Okay, thank you.
We have Mr. Janik.
Okay. Mr. Janik. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, hi. Hi, team. How are you today?
We're well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I want to follow up on Councillor Lumley's question of Mr. Newman. The suggestion he made was to post the arborist's report online. Is there any reason why that couldn't be done?
I don't know. I mean, I would suspect that the school district might have it posted. It was done for them, but I don't know. It is something that I haven't looked at that aspect to see. Yeah.
Okay, but there is one to post, right?
I'm assuming there's a process. Yeah.
Okay, I have asked for it, but I haven't got one, so I don't know what to think.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't seen one. I haven't asked for one, so I haven't seen one. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's like the Sasquatch.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Council.
Thanks for your question. Thank you.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Mayor Beamish, Suzanne Singer is asking to return for further questions.
Okay, well, we are actually at our 10-minute mark. I'm going to call a hold to the further questions now. And
Okay.
we have another meeting tonight, so I think we'll I've been watching my clock. It's now 4:38 and we're at 10 minutes on the inquiries. So I think we'll just go. The next meeting is at regular meeting of council is April the 20th at 3 p.m. and call for motion to adjourn. Councillor Lumley, seconded by Councillor Crowell. All in favor of adjournment? Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you.